Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of the Prove Me Wrong podcast. Once again, I am your host, Pete Lieb, and I'm glad you're all on board with me today. I am going to get right into it today. I have one pretty simple question that we're going to talk about for the show. And it is, has the U.S. government, and specifically the CIA, have they used drugs to control the masses for the super rich, primarily through the influence of musicians, artists, other cultural figures? It's kind of a long question. Our guest today is going to be here to help us discuss it. My guest today is Mr. John Potash. Yeah, he's the author and producer of the book and film Drugs as Weapons Against Us, the CIA's War on Musicians and Activists. John has been featured in C-SPAN, American History TV, The Real Channel, and on A&E television networks. He's also appeared on hundreds of radio programs across the United States, England, and New Zealand. And he works with counseling people with mental health problems and addictions for over 30 years. So he has a lot of knowledge on the topic, and he's going to help us talk about it today. You can find John's movie on Amazon Prime Video and his book on Amazon as well. And his webpage is johnpotash.com. Welcome, John, to the Prove Me Wrong podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Pete.
Can you start with just a brief recap of your background, John, and how you became involved in this research?
Sure. Yeah, well, I got into social activism after college, and in college I started getting involved in social activism, and then I tripped about half a dozen times with acid, and felt that it majorly hurt my mind. I mean, I had good trips, I didn't have bad trips, but I didn't have any bad experiences. It's just coming down is not as fun as being up, of course. But afterwards, I just couldn't think as well. I lost some mental abilities that I just never quite got back. But my grades dropped drastically, in the first year after tripping about half a dozen times, and then slowly but surely my grades got up, came back up again. But I still felt like I had to work much harder to get those good grades that seemed easy, in the very beginning of college before tripping. And so I just didn't even think that much of it. I kind of just repressed it a bit and just continued to think along the way I used to think that, the government kind of outlawed acid and other drugs because they, wanted to hurt the left. That's what I just was still kind of buying into that. But slowly but surely, while doing drug counseling for a living when I first got out of college, and then other mental health counseling after that, after getting a graduate degree, and doing a lot of research on the side, where I found that the CIA had a project called MK Ultra, which had about 150 sub-projects, where they were using LSD and all these other drugs in what they called unconventional warfare. And I came to find, studying the documents, studying what they were doing historically, that they were using them on many, activists at home and abroad, but mostly at home, mostly here in the United States, that were, fighting their racist pro-war agenda. And that's what I came to find after I started researching this in about 1990 and came out with my book, Drugs as Weapons Against Us 20 years later, and my film, 4 years after that.
So I've heard a lot about MK Ultra, and I want to get back into the CIA eventually, roll back around to that. But this MK Ultra, at this point, it is so ingrained in our society. It's in movies, it's in books, everything is an MK Ultra subplot. It seems like maybe it's one of the worst. I mean, was it ever meant to be a secret? Was it one of the worst kept secrets ever? Or is it, obviously it must have been a real thing. What was it about? I mean, is it still going on?
Well, I show the evidence that, it's still going on. The same things are still happening. They're just put it under different, names and categories. MK Ultra started in 1953, and it was like an umbrella for many other projects going on at that time. And in 1961, when President John F. Kennedy came into office, he tried to close it down. He fired, Dulles as the CIA director, put in his own director, McCone. So he closed it down, but they kept running it behind his back. And when he found out it was still running behind his back in 1963, they tried to close it down again. Actually, in 64. In 64, they changed the name to MK Search. And so it was basically MK Ultra is the new name. And then when activists broke into an FBI office in 1971 and stole thousands of FBI files and learned for the first time about the counterintelligence program, the FBI's counterintelligence program, this led to a whole lot of investigations, and so some of the few honest congressmen and senators launched an investigation into all the U.S. intelligence operations they could find, and they found MK Search, which was basically just MK Ultra, and they held the Senate Church Committee investigations and hearings, and at that time the head of the CIA just basically shredded as many of the MK Ultra documents as he possibly could. We're talking about, estimates are about 300,000 documents are shredded, and but 30,000 were still in the finance department, and so they did try to hide it. I mean, the shredding of documents is illegal. It's supposed to be government documents, supposed to be, everyone's supposed to be able to know about most of these documents. So, I don't think it was just so. I think it's become more common knowledge because powerful people really looked into it and tried to get the word out, and the media tried not to let the word get out. Mainstream media, but because they show the evidence of how they work for the oligarchs, basically. But this is how it got out. It got out because powerful people tried to get it out, and then many activists have tried to get it out even more since then.
So there were a lot of, like you said, kind of subcategories under MK Ultra. What was the ultimate goal? Was it just to see the effect of certain mind-altering drugs on individuals, or was it some type of agent training ground or brainwashing training ground? What was the ultimate goal?
Well, there was many projects. I really couldn't concentrate on all the projects, but basically it was the use of drugs to subdue the masses in different ways. With the kind of hippies of the 60s, it was to divert the anti-war movement and the civil rights movement. With with LSD and other psychedelics, with the heroin and cocaine, it was to basically undermine the civil rights movement by pumping in the heroin and cocaine into so many of the Black and Latino neighborhoods, and of course it eventually got to a lot of poor white neighborhoods and just white neighborhoods in general as collateral damage. But I show the evidence that it really was directed into these poor neighborhoods of color. And this is, to undermine the civil rights movement. And so that was some of it. Other parts of MK Ultra were the use of hypnosis and drugs to create, basically agents, dissociative identity disorder in people so that they could use them as agents in different ways. And some of those agents were assassins, and I talk about the federal hearings where some of these agents, said, through long-term counseling, they found out what had happened to them and how the dissociative identity disorder was created in them with abuse and drugs. And they, some of the tasks that they were, had done for the CIA. And these were at federal hearings under President Clinton in the 1990s, and their therapists came to those hearings with these, clients of theirs or patients. And this one therapist in a YouTube video said that 40 other counselors called her and said, I've got clients just like yours that went through this abuse from between the ages of 3 and 8 years old, when the mind is very vulnerable to, just being traumatized, and dissociative disorder or dissociative identity disorder being created. Dissociative identity disorder is another name for multiple personality disorder. And so that's, this happened to our clients too. Now that's the more controversial part of my book. Most of my book is actually just about the use of drugs to, sedate, divide, and divert the masses in different ways. Now, with the musicians, what I show the evidence of is that they surrounded them with different undercover agents and manipulated them to inadvertently promote drugs. In most cases, the ones I focus on, there was inadvertently promoting drugs. So, of course, some musicians were part of the oligarchy and were doing it in an undercover way. But mostly the musicians I focus on, like John Lennon, Kurt Cobain, Tupac Shakur, and Jimi Hendrix, they were just manipulated to promote these drugs. And then when they sobered up more and started promoting, more activism and sobriety, they were done away with, sadly enough.
So can I back up just a moment on that? Because I want to hit that all. But can you give me just a little bit of history on the CIA itself? How is the CIA able to, what we had said here before, they were essentially caught doing these things. They were told to stop. They did not. They continued to go. And they were caught again, and they continued to go again. How is it that the CIA is able to act essentially outside of the law and not necessarily in the best interests of the U.S. government or the president at that point if he's asking them to stop? How are they able to do that? What is some of the history of the CIA?
Well, the history of the CIA, according to good researchers like British editor Frances Stoner Saunders in her book The Cultural Cold War, or Victor Marchetti, one of the highest level CIA whistleblowers, in his book, which his name leaves me at the moment, but Victor Marchetti's, was an assistant to the director at one point. He was like two people below the director of the CIA at one point. And these type of people who wrote about it all say that basically the CIA leaders came from the wealthiest families in the country. They came from the family members of, like the Dulles brothers, for example, were the, Allen Dulles, who was the longest running civilian head of the CIA, was a lawyer for the Rockefellers and the J.P. Morgan families. Others were, such as I talk about in the book, the Mellons owned Mellon Bank, and Mellon Hitchcock family had members in U.S. intelligence, and they also owned Gulf Oil. And so these were, again, the wealthiest families in the country, and so they had incredible power. They had members they basically had members of Congress and Senate in their pocket with lots of campaign contributions. They already had people in power in different administrations before JFK. And so, JFK could only do so much against them, he knew. So that's just the way it worked. Now, the CIA was founded in 1947, and the National Security Act of 1947 basically made the CIA above the law, sadly enough, where they could do things that broke the law but were considered in national security interest and get it in, and keep it quiet. Mm-hmm. So that's some of the way it worked.
So, I mean, I have no illusions that the CIA was probably absolutely involved in the distribution of drugs. I mean, I think they've been caught now multiple times, right? Involved in drug trafficking without really any consequences. That whole thing, I'm sure you've seen that movie with Tom Cruise, right? Made in America.
Yeah. It was well done. That was a well done movie.
Yeah, I liked it. It was really nice.
Yeah.
But that whole Mena, Arkansas, that was all the CIA, and they would have never probably been caught if it hadn't been for those two kids that ended up finding the drugs and then had to be killed for it, unfortunately. So, that doesn't surprise me at all that the CIA would be involved. But so again, their goal then, you're saying, was really just to tamp down any sense of rebellion, any type of anti-establishment, any type of we need equality. You're saying that they basically said, okay, we're going to tamp that down by essentially giving them drugs that take away the motivation to keep that fight up.
Yeah, partly that, and partly hurt their minds. I mean, with the acid, it hurts their minds. Ecstasy hurts their minds, and I show studies that support that. I mean, ecstasy is really more clear cut how it's hurting people's memory, and international studies really show it concretely. With acid, LSD, I found, I present 4 studies in both the book and the film that show that it's causing some damage. They can't tell exactly what it is, but it's causing some problems, either with some emotional instability or other things that cause problems in best thinking. And, and so it's just, this is what's happening with those drugs. With the cocaine and the heroin, it causes incredible, instability in both, not just the addict, but the addict's family and the community all around that addict, because of the behaviors of the addicts, when they're addicted to these drugs like heroin and cocaine. But even weed, sadly enough, I mean, again, I'm neutral on criminal, on legality, illegality. I actually think it maybe should be, I'm neutral, and I'll say, but
sure,
it seems to just turn us into a bunch of house cats when we're just smoking weed every day and not thinking our best, and normally I could care less if people can do all the drugs and smoke as much weed as they want. I don't have a moral issue about it. It's just that, when the conservatives are taking more and more of our rights away, it leaves too many of us passive and just hanging around getting high and not thinking our best when they're doing that, and it's hard to resist them.
Well, I think that is a constant struggle with or without drugs. I think that there are so many other things right now that are made
I agree.
to
There's
confuse.
too. I'm just I can't focus on all of them.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm just saying, so many things are out there right now to confuse the masses and take their mind off of what's important. I agree with you 100% on that. Social media is the new LSD. I mean, it destroys your brain, and it takes your mind off the ball. That's for sure. So how were the drugs then administered again? How did they actually get these? They had to have put large amounts of narcotics into the population. How did they do that?
Well, with the part of the way, that's why I focus on musicians, because part of it is manipulating certain musicians to kind of promote the drug culture. And then, people kind of think, oh, well, this musician I like so much does it, maybe it's not so bad. They got John Lennon and manipulated him into, using heroin, promoting that. They pretended like Jimi Hendrix had a heroin problem, like he died of his heroin problem, and, inadvertently promoting it. But Hendrix never really had a heroin problem. He just tried it once or twice and didn't like it. He died of other issues that I think, these undercover agents actually killed him. But
do you have
John Lennon, he did develop. What's that?
I was just going to say, what type of evidence do you have that would kind of point towards Jimi Hendrix being murdered?
Yeah, well, there's a number of different issues, and one is the fact that his manager, Mike Jeffries, was admitted working for British intelligence, MI6, and there's so much evidence supporting that, but there's also a load of evidence supporting that he never left MI6, that he continued while he was working for Jimi Hendrix. He did all kinds of things to sabotage Jimi Hendrix's attempts to get into activism. Jimi Hendrix, in his fiance's memoir, Monica Danneman's memoir, she says that Hendrix believed that Jeffries dosed his drink with a super psychedelic right before he was going to do an anti-war benefit and messed up his guitar playing. He was really upset about it. He thinks that Jeffries planted drugs on him at an airport, and he said, I would never be so stupid as to carry drugs on me in an airport. And so Jeffries must have placed it on him and set him up to control him better, because Hendrix was constantly trying to fire Jimi Hendrix, but his lawyers kept saying he can't really get out of his contract because it was a very complicated situation with Jeffries. And Jeffries also had Hendrix kidnapped by mafia and pretended to free him only after 3 or 4 days with bigger mafia. So there's all kinds of problems with Jeffries, but finally Hendrix fires Jeffries for good, and 48 hours after firing Jeffrey, he's dead. Hendrix is dead. And so 2 people in Hendrix's life were hanging out with Jeffries within the next 2 or 3 years, and said when Mike Jeffrey was drunk, he actually admitted having Hendrix killed. And and so he pretended like it was for financial reasons, but who can do that? Who can just have someone killed within 48 hours
Right.
that way, And so it's it's just pretty obvious that he has, that kind of connection to high-level assassins. So, and so the CIA and MI6 work together on a number of international operations. They're it's just good examples of that in many places. And so the FBI had, Hendricks also under 24-hour surveillance, and we know that from, his FBI file and things like that. So it's just that's some of the massive evidence of what they did to Jimi Hendrix. And of course, there's with the others, with John Lennon, a longtime attorney and British newspaper columnist named Fenton Bressler. He spent 7 years investigating the CIA's role in John Lennon's murder, and he came to the conclusion after investigating for 7 years that he showed all the evidence of how the CIA did that by creating a dissociative identity disorder assassin in Mark David Chapman. Now, a guy named Philip Strongman wrote a book within the last about 5 or 10 years that says that agrees with everything that Fenton Bressler came out with about the CIA assassinating John Lennon, but he just adds that he found that the doorman that night at Dakota, who had just gotten the job maybe a month or two before, was a guy named Jose Sanjanis Perdomo, who actually was a CIA hitman and was from the Cuban exile community that the CIA used for different operations. And so, he actually has one more name. He's got 4 names, that guy. It's like Jose Sanjanis. I forget the third name, and then but Perdomo is his last name. And so Cuba's got him in their, files as, of course, a Cuban exile that's been working for the CIA for a long time. But there's just, loads of evidence on him. And the police, when they first came to the scene, actually thought it was the doorman that assassinated John Lennon. They didn't even think it was Mark David Chapman at first, but then they got evidence on Chapman firing bullets too. So it's, anyway, Mark David Chapman's been the one that's been considered the assassin.
So when did it come out? When did it come out that the doorman, or when was it discovered that the doorman was in the CIA?
I think Philip Strongman's the first person I know that came out with all the evidence on him, on the doorman, and that was again about maybe within the last 5 or 10 years. I guess it was about 10 years ago, I should say. When he came out with his book in Britain, and he had published some top-selling music books in Britain, and decided to just focus on John Lennon and his life and death, and did some very good investigative work on that doorman, and found all that evidence about that doorman. So
do you think that it was purposefully hidden back in 1980, 81? I think it was 1980 when he was...
Oh, of course. This is the way it always works. I mean, the media, the mainstream media, if you look at the insiders such as Ben Bagdikian was a top writer for the Washington Post that helped break things during the Watergate era, and he was really the top guy that broke the Pentagon Papers, and was featured in that movie The Post with Meryl Streep playing Katharine Graham and all that. Anyway, Ben Bagdikian won Pulitzer Prizes. He ends up becoming the dean of the University of California Berkeley School of Journalism, and he takes a sabbatical to analyze the business side of the media, and finds that basically, eventually comes to the conclusion that about 6 corporations control, well over 90% of our information. And the way they do that is that these top defense contracting companies, pharmaceutical companies, banks, insurance companies, etc., share boards of directors with all of the top mainstream media: New York Times, Time Magazine, NBC, ABC, CBS, all these top corporations that have these top magazines and newspapers, etc. And that's the way it works. That's the way, because by corporate law, he says, you can't publish something that's going to negatively affect the profit margin of the corporation that you also share. You're also on the board of directors of. So that's why they really can't publish a bunch of anti-war articles, because it'll affect the defense contracting's profit margin. So that's one of the main ways they do it. But others have in Watergate muckraker Carl Bernstein, who had basically published a investigative piece that was based on the Senate Church Committee's findings in the mid-1970s about the fact that the CIA director had to admit under oath in the hearings that well over 400 members of the media lived dual lives in their work for the CIA. And a great majority of those 400 are the owners of the top media, and he lists them in his article, Carl Bernstein, as well as the top editors and managers of the media. So that's another way it works, how they control the information.
So you would almost have to believe that the CIA is probably one of the, if we have this many covert agents and this many hidden cells or what have you, they have to be one of the biggest organizations in the U.S. government, right? I mean, they're not telling you exactly how many people are in the CIA. We don't really have a number, do we?
No, we don't. But when I say the CIA, though, remember that it's you could really just say U.S. intelligence in general, because U.S. intelligence is 14 plus agencies, and the CIA director by the National Security Act of 1947 was just made the director of all 14 plus intelligence agencies, and so that's how it comes to be that way with the CIA directing things, but U.S. intelligence in general. We're talking about naval intelligence, Army intelligence, National Security Agency, which is huge. It's, estimates are like 40, 50,000 working for the National Security Agency, right near me in Fort Meade. I live in Baltimore, Maryland. And this is in Fort Meade, Maryland. But you got so many different, intelligence groups. Of course, the FBI is under the CIA and so on. And so, that's how they do it. So I use CIA more as a kind of, symbolic of all U.S. intelligence in general.
So in your research, I'm assuming they also found some evidence that they introduced that to the Beatles as well. I mean, I don't know that any band would have probably promoted an uptick in drug usage around the world as much as the Beatles had to have.
Well,
in the
they
mid-60s?
did, and it was sad that they did. And the way it happened was they had the assistant director of MK Ultra, of the CIA's project MK Ultra, Robert Lashbrook, brought loads of LSD and money and agents to London in 1965, early 1965. And so the dentist, George Harrison, had George Harrison and his girlfriend Patty Boyd and John Lennon and his wife Cynthia Lennon over for dinner, and then had them drink. Said, you have to try our coffee afterwards, and it's great coffee. And they said, all right. So they had the coffee, and it was dosed with LSD. And he told them after they drank it, and John Lennon was furious. Like, what are you doing, dosing us with LSD? And George Harrison said, what's LSD? He didn't even know what it was at that time. And so basically, they got them trying it against their will the first time. And then lots of people around them, with all the propaganda kind of supporting LSD in the U.S. and building up in Britain and making it so fashionable, they got them to try it again a year later, voluntarily. And so they were convinced to think it was a positive thing. Granted, these are just, young guys in their 20s at this time, and so they're more impressionable. And so, he thought he liked it, but he took lots of acid, and at some point he said he thought he was losing his mind. He said he even considered drilling a hole in his skull, thinking that it would expand his mind. Something called tree panning at that time. So he was, and it hurt his emotional control. When he tried to go solo, when he was going solo, he found himself throwing up for hours before his solo shows, his solo concerts. And so he was really having problems. And so, and he also developed a heroin problem And so by the 70s, though, he gotten much away from all the harder drugs, and just focused on raising his child, and then came back out with these 2 double albums in the late 70s, 1979, Double Fantasy and all. And so he was getting back into activism at that time too. So sadly enough, they did manipulate him to promote the acid, and then inadvertently promote heroin. And then when he tried to sober up, of course he did sober up and got more into activism again, and was just about to get his citizenship in the United States. They did him in, yeah.
And it seems extreme to me. I mean, I get that John Lennon and Jimi Hendrix are very recognizable. They do have some bit of societal pull, but man, it seems like a lot of work to just eliminate somebody just for that little bit of uptick that he may get from singing, Give Peace a Chance. You know what I'm saying? It's hard for me to wrap my brain around somebody saying, just eliminate him. It's easier.
Think about who were the most influential people in the world at that time. And we're not just talking about them. They're just symbolic of a lot of musicians.
Yeah.
A lot of musicians that were manipulated this way.
Sure.
And so the most influential people in our world, especially when we're young, when we're idealistic youth, because they're worried about idealistic youth and their activism. And we're talking about, students in particular who were very inspired by musicians. But, people in their 20s in general love musicians. And so when you think about, so the CIA was a battle for our hearts and minds. They can't control us physically because there's too many people, and there's too few of them.
Sure.
But they can control us through our hearts and minds and make us think this is what we want. And that's what they do in terms of, manipulating musicians to promote certain, ideas and values and desires. And so who would naturally want to ever use heroin? Putting a needle in your arm is such a bizarre thing.
For sure.
But when you have Kurt Cobain or John Lennon, these musicians we love, doing it, it makes it more acceptable. And so, and they, that's their huge money crop is opium, and the battles for the poppy fields in Vietnam and Afghanistan. And that's their huge, cash crop. So, the best evidence, I show it in my books, is the Vietnam War was over the poppy fields. The best poppy fields in the world at that time were in the Golden Triangle area of the Vietnam area. And at the other end of the same mountain range was the Golden Crescent for poppy fields in Afghanistan. And it's no coincidence that those are the two longest wars in U.S. history.
Well, I mean, the CIA was in Vietnam in the 50s, right? I mean, they were kind of fighting the war in the 50s.
Well, they were trying to get to those poppy fields then, but the French controlled them back then. Yeah, and so there was a battle over just the poppy fields in general. The French were battling with the Viet Cong and losing to the Viet Cong, but the U.S. was just in there in a small way back then. It wasn't until at 60, 61 when they started getting in there in a bigger way. And so, but JFK had a sea change while he was in office and decided to pull out right before he was assassinated, and show the evidence that him and other leaders that were against the Vietnam War for the poppy fields were assassinated.
Wow. So it just also shows how society, I think, maybe has changed, obviously, in those last 40, 50, 60 years. Because you're saying that these two guys, George and John, are over at a dinner party, and they get dosed with LSD in their drink. And there is no legal repercussions to that. There's no, I'm calling the cops and you've drugged me and essentially assaulted me, unknowing. It's just, I dosed you, haha. And that's kind of it. It's amazing to me because you hear that all the time. People just, I slipped something in your drink. I've dosed you. And there were never any repercussions of that. That's
terrible, yeah.
That's amazing to me. So,
yeah.
So,
and Mick Jagger was finally manipulated and convinced to try acid the first time in 1967, and by an undercover FBI agent named David Schneiderman, and he was also undercover. They say he was undercover in MI5, according to the London daily newspaper, the Daily Mail. And so this guy, who they called the Acid King, just manipulated Mick Jagger to try acid the first time, and within several hours, police came in and raided a party they were at, and inadvertently, and then promoted the fact that, he's busted. Mick Jagger's busted trying LSD when it was the first time he ever tried LSD, and he didn't want to promote it. He didn't want to do it, but he was, talked into it last minute. And it was the first time he ever did it. So he was the last, the Rolling Stones to try it. But so that's just how they do things, yeah.
And so I get that Lennon was definitely an activist. Hendrix was going that way in terms of activism. But somebody like Kurt Cobain, I never really got from Kurt Cobain that he was overly political or an activist really in any way.
Kurt Cobain was very radical. He had, in his first album, in Nevermind, he had different, like messages, like the dollar bill and a fish hook with the baby, like, in the water going after it. He was very anti-capitalist. He had a bunch of, he quoted Marx at times. He said he had originally planned in his biography, the first biography of him before he died, he said he originally planned to have all kinds of anarchist essays about how to build your own bomb and things like that in Nevermind, but he thought that it was too soon. And he wanted to try to reach more people first and become more popular before he published essays like that. So he was very radical, very leftist, he said he would only allow himself a picture on the cover of Rolling Stone the first time if he was allowed to, have that T-shirt saying corporate magazines still suck.
Right.
And so he had a number. I should show a bunch of pieces of evidence about how, radical leftist he was. So, yeah, he was into activist causes. He just wasn't, the mainstream media just didn't cover it that much. He did abortion rights benefits. He did, different. He did stuff on the side that was just, wasn't covered well.
So in your book, and I know I actually watched the movie over the weekend. So in your movie, you also mentioned that Courtney Love had some CIA connection. Is that correct?
Yes, she did. And so she was, I get into it more in the book. I didn't have time to get into it in the film, but she basically fits the category of like what they did to Mark David Chapman of using drugs, hypnosis. But with her, it matches what these women who testified at these federal hearings under Clinton went through. And these women that testified in the Clinton federal hearings were close to the same age as Courtney Love, and actually from some of the same areas of the United States as Courtney Love. But she, by different biographies of her and her mother's own memoir, she was sexually abused from the ages of, when she was a child, an infant, and she went to counseling at ages either 2 or 3 years old, depending on the biographer, and her mother's memoir. But then she continued in counseling, for many years as a young child. And first thing, getting counseling at age 3 is absurd. I'm a counselor myself. It's a ridiculous age to get counseling. But by the time she was 13, she told her father, she wrote a letter to her father to get her out of juvenile detention. She said that the counselors were all having sex with her and the psychiatrists were giving her psychohypnotic drugs, and she was naming these MK Ultra drugs that they used to enhance hypnosis. And so that just shows, she fit the pattern for going through, induced trauma that caused dissociative identity disorder. But by her early teens, when her father got her out of this juvenile detention facility, because her father lost full custody of her because her mother had super wealthy parents who bought off the father's, Hank Harrison's attorney, when Courtney was about 5 years old. So he gets her out of there and finds that she had turned into a drug addicted prostitute by her early teens. And biographers just show in her own letters how she said she was prostituting. She was prostituting for the Japanese mafia and the Taiwanese mafia. She was prostituting in Taiwan. she told her first husband, was quoted as saying that she was sleeping with Army generals in Alaska. And they told us that wars were good for us, and so she had inside information for why the Republicans are all right, and that's just the way she was. That was her political ideology. She was, he called her a right-wing Phyllis Diller. So then he divorces her, and she goes and latches on to, Kurt Cobain and tries to mess with him, and so. While she just turned 17 years old, she had visited her father, Hank Harrison, in Ireland, where he was researching a book, and he says that a guy named Stephen O'Leary had befriended him, and then befriended his daughter immediately, and traveled with her to England, and where she went to the top music scenes and passed out LSD like candy. She brought 1,000 hits of LSD to those music scenes. And got a lot of musicians tripping and using other drugs. She was also passing out pain pills and passing out other drugs like candy.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was repeating the actions of, Robert Lashbrook of MK Ultra, assistant director of MK Ultra. She then did the exact same thing in Portland, Seattle, and Los Angeles. And so Stephen O'Leary then wrote to Hank Harrison on his deathbed in 2005, saying that. I was actually working for the CIA all those years. That year when I had met Courtney Love, and so he admitted that, and I verified that deathbed confession with finding his obituary for where Hank Harrison said he got the letter from. He got the letter from Minnesota, and his brother was Kevin O'Leary, and Kevin O'Leary was traveling with Stephen O'Leary at that time too with Courtney Love. So it's just, it's just really something which she's, was turned into and which she did.
Was there a paper trail of her being in Taiwan or in, you said, Japan during the time that she says she was?
Yeah, biographers have seen the letters she wrote from Taiwan to her ex-boyfriend. Melissa Rossi is an award-winning journalist, and her book about Courtney Love, her biography of Courtney Love, found all the paper trail. Yes. So
say, because she just, in what my limited knowledge of her, she just says a lot of random shit, a lot. And so her saying those type of things to me, I would just think she's crazy, because she has kind of a history of saying some things that are kind of unsettling, unstable, that you don't really know the truth of it. So I guess if you can find proof that she was there around that time. So do you feel that, I know that obviously the kind of the culture of the society has changed, but now we have this enormous heroin problem in the United States. We have this enormous, even bigger probably, prescription medication problem in the United States. I don't know if you're still looking into those type of things. Just in your opinion, do you think that potentially those type of those issues are connected some way?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, as I said, the Vietnam area was a war for the poppy fields of Vietnam, and the Afghanistan war is a war for the poppy fields in Afghanistan. And it's not only to make money off the poppy fields and the heroin, but it's also to subdue communities, and that's what they've done. They've really caused heroin problems in many communities in this country, and it doesn't just affect the addict; it affects the family of the addict and the community around that family. Is all massively negatively affected. And when these communities are so negatively affected around these these massive heroin addicts throughout the country, it's hard for them to do anything but do their 9-to-5 jobs, deal with the heroin problem, and not have time for anything much else. And that's a sad fact. And so it really hurts a lot of people trying to change society for the better and stop the oligarchs from taking more of our rights away, which they did with the, Patriot Act, and continuing to amass more and more wealth, which the billionaires are doing with all kinds of tax breaks and, not paying, taxes themselves, which is incredible. All these 60 multinational corporations pay no taxes, but actually get money from the government, through the tax laws.
Well, I know that I'm from Ohio originally, and I know that heroin is an enormous problem in Ohio right now. I mean, that's just it's just out of control for sure. But again, I also think what better way of controlling the masses than all these prescription medications? Because now it's there's not even an illegal stigma to it. We can have the doctors prescribe it to you. You can have it sitting on your counter. Nobody will look at that and think twice. Like, oh, sure, you need that Xanax, you need that Klonopin, you need, whatever that may be. And these are heavy-duty drugs that change your brain chemistry, steal your motivation.
Psychiatric. Yeah, I mean, the benzos are psychiatrically prescribed, but they're also very addictive. So they really can mess up a lot of people, who have any tendency to addiction or even just abuse tendencies. And so, it can hurt a lot of people,
Have you ever been contacted at all by the government after your book or after the documentary? Has there been any feedback about what you've written?
After my first book, The FBI War on Tupac Shakur and Black Leaders, I got contacted by an FBI agent who says he just wanted a book for historical reasons. He likes, history of the FBI. In terms of being contacted by other government officials, off the top of my head, no. I've had things messed with. I've had, my phone messed with. My interviewers have said they've never had their internet systems go down until they interviewed me. I've had all kinds of things happen over the years. So, I suspect there's been a lot of interference.
Wow.
It still is there still is a lot of interference.
Are you still working in the field? Are you still researching more, or have you kind of?
Well, I pay my bills through mental health counseling. I do that for a living, but I am still researching things, and right now I'm just going for a political novel, which covers just different underground stuff, different stuff like covert stuff. But so that's what I'm working on now. And I just wrote an article for a journal called Garrison about Jeffrey Epstein and Courtney Love and some of the stuff I was telling you about.
Is there a connection between Jeffrey Epstein and Courtney Love?
Yeah, she was one of the.
Was she one of his Lolitas?
Female figure. She was one of the only female figures, the only female celebrity circled in his black book as being a material witness to, sexual assault and all.
Oh wow, that is a ball of yarn in itself that I would love to unwind, that whole Jeffrey Epstein thing.
Yeah, we'll check out the article if you want on.
Okay.
You can friend me on Facebook, and I'll just message me, and I'll share your connection to the article.
Sure, will do. Well, I just have another couple minutes here. So what did you hope? What was the hope that you could accomplish first when you came out with the book, and then with the movie? What were you looking to hopefully do with the book?
Well, I was hoping to kind of educate people to make better decisions about getting involved in all these psychedelic drugs and these different other drugs that could really hurt their lives, hurt their minds, and hurt their lives. So to try to get people, to steer clear of this stuff and, have sex and rock and roll without the drugs kind of thing.
No doubt.
But also, looking to hopefully save some musicians from this stuff and just hopefully make a little dent and change history for the better. If I could,
it is
in a little tiny, small way.
It's really taken off. Even recently, it's still going on. I mean, Chris Cornell started to get more active, and suddenly he passed away. I think Chester Bennington.
Yeah, there's a new movie coming out about Chris Cornell. The writer producer of it told me, I think it's July 2020. It should be free actually on the internet.
Oh.
Around then, and that he was murdered.
Oh, I completely believe it. I completely believe it.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously,
Chester Bennington for similar reasons, but I don't know if they're going to cover Chester Bennington in the same way as Chris Cornell in there.
And I also obviously 100% believe Cobain was murdered. That there was not a suicide. Yeah. There was no way with the amount of drugs that were in his system that he could have pulled the trigger on anything, or even.
Yeah, I mean, the top forensic pathologist in the I was just going to say that the top forensic pathologist in the country, Cyril Weck, said on Pittsburgh CBS News channel that basically that he thinks that Kurt Cobain was murdered and made it look like a suicide. maybe someone's interfering with it. I don't know.
There you go. See, we've been talking about it, and it's all right on cue. See, that's interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, but it was good talking with you about
Absolutely.
it all. And so I look forward to hearing the final version of what you put out there. But
For sure.
Thanks for the interview.
Yeah. Would you like to spend another moment? Do you do any type of public appearances or book signings or things like that you wanted to promote?
I'm not doing that now until I come out with another project. So right now, I'll just say, if people want to find out more about my book and film, go to my site's got several different names, but one of them is johnpotash.com, but the other easier one to spell out is drugsasweapons.com.
Okay.
Is my website where you can find out about the book and film, Drugs as Weapons Against Us, the CIA War on Musicians and Activists.
Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate you joining me today. I think the conversation has been very informative, for sure. I would love to. I'll definitely contact you about some of your other work as well.
Thanks a lot, Pete.
Thank you. You too. So that was once again John Potash talking about how the U.S. government, the CIA, is and has been using drugs, LSD, heroin, things like that, as a means of controlling the general public, the masses, in a way to kind of tamp down rebellion, tamp down equal rights, tamp down any kind of civil rights that may be coming up, silence some of the more vocal activists within the country, within the world, completely. It's believable to me. It is amazing to me how you'll have these individuals who will get dosed. And I think I mentioned it in the discussion. They'll dose these people and then, oh, yeah, I gave you LSD, and there's no repercussions of that. There's no ramifications of you drugging me. You could die from that kind of thing. People have had bad trips on that and done terrible things and jumped out windows and killed themselves. That could have all happened because of you dosing me without my knowledge. But it happened all the time. And so, yeah, once these artists finally decided, I'm going to get clean, I'm going to get a hold of my life and maybe become a little bit more involved in outside activities, then suddenly they end up dead. I mean, it's happened a lot. And it's no coincidence that they were all in that late 20s time frame when they're not quite a child anymore. And then in those early teen years, it's 20 years when they're trying to make it. Now they've become a little bit more worldly. They've seen a little bit more. They've become a little bit more, their eyes have opened. They understand that there are bigger things in the world than tune in, turn on, drop out. And they become active in that. And then they're no longer useful to the rich, the wealthy, those who would subjugate the rest. And they're eliminated. I cannot imagine the discussion when we say, let's just kill Jimi Hendrix. Get rid of him. Get rid of Kurt Cobain. Get rid of John Lennon. The cavalier way that you could throw away such amazing people with these amazing gifts that a lot of us don't have. I mean, they created these martyrs forever. It boggles the mind that's the easier route, because it seems to me, maybe it's just the world we live in now. It seems to me like it's almost impossible to motivate anybody to do anything anymore. But then again, that may be by design. The prescription medication has gone through the roof. Everybody is on some type of prescription medication. Everybody has something for anxiety or depression. They hand them out like candy. Everybody has something for ADHD. Everybody has something for some other slight mental tick. And here's a prescription for you. You'll take this the rest of your life. We don't know what the side effects are. It's rewiring your brain. You aren't the same person you were before you started taking it, but it's okay. So we've got it all built in now. It's already built into the cake. So maybe the CIA doesn't have to introduce LSD and heroin. maybe they just got the pharmacies and the doctors and these big pharma to do it for them and just write some scripts and legally get you all sick and addicted. I don't know. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts about him talking about Courtney Love, her ties to the CIA, her, somehow attaching herself to Kurt Cobain, John Lennon's impact, Jimi Hendrix's impact? What are your thoughts about that? Do those float for you? Are those theories that you can get behind? You can contact us. You can drop us a line on our email address. It's provemewrongcast@gmail.com. You can tell us what your thoughts are. Also, you could leave a message on our Facebook account, our Instagram account. They're just Prove Me Wrong. Just search for that, and you can find them on either. If you're just looking for the podcast itself, you can, really go through any podcast app that you normally use. We're also on Stitcher, Spotify, iTunes, Tunein Radio, SoundCloud, really anything where you find podcasts, you can find the Prove Me Wrong podcast. We're also on YouTube as well. If you're watching us on YouTube, there we go. You see a little scroll right here. It says like and subscribe. Please do. If you like and subscribe to the channel on YouTube, you will be notified when new content comes out. You'll be the first one to be able to see it. Good conversations just like this, hopefully. So feel free. Drop us a line. Give us what you're thinking. If you have any suggestions for topics or speakers, or if you're a speaker yourself and you want to be on the show, you can drop us a line there. Again, through Facebook or the Prove Me Wrong email address, and we'll set something up. So before we go, then, I want to say that this episode of the podcast was brought to you by our friends at Javaremix. Javaremix is a perfect blend of 100% organic Arabica coffee. It's infused with CBD oil. Start your day off on the right foot with a great tasting cup of coffee with all the demonstrated benefits of CBD. Javaremix offers traditional ground coffee as well as single-serve K-cups in both regular and decaf. They also have teas, body scrubs, bath bombs, you name it. As an added benefit to our Prove Me Wrong listeners, if you go online right now, javaremix.com, and enter the promo code Prove Me Wrong, you'll receive an additional 20% discount off your entire shopping experience. Javaremix also offers free shipping on all orders over $40, so you have literally no reason not to try it. So once again, that's Javaremix, promo code Prove Me Wrong. We're also brought to you tonight by ZendoZones citronella burners from JT Eaton, and they are shaped like fearless little tiki gods. So let Surf and Stan, Hawaiian Howie, and Luau Lily bring the islands to your backyard with ZendoZones citronella burners. ZendoZones uses natural 3% citronella candles and incense cones. They're perfect for patios, decks, backyards, campsites, poolside, and more. You can enjoy the outdoors again. They are available on Amazon and at select Ace Hardware stores. So collect them all today. So once again, for my guest, John Potash, my name is Pete Lieb. This has been the Prove Me Wrong podcast, and we'll talk to you again soon.